Welcome, everybody, to the latest BuffZone Podcast. I'm Brian Howell, and please be joined by my colleague, Pat Rooney. And Pat, we've got a lot to catch up on because football's been over now for a couple of weeks, and there's been a little movement with football, some news coming out of there. But then, obviously basketball in full swing and almost wrapping up a non-conference play, actually. I mean, both the men and women are gearing up for Big 12 play here in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, we always say it. Amazing how the time flies. November is always so busy, but it goes fast, right? And then here we are, down to just basketball right now, pretty much for the Buffs. Great NCAA tournament runs for both soccer and volleyball. Football, obviously, not the campaign that anyone around the program or the fans thought it would be, but it's hoop season in full swing, and I think both teams, especially the men, have shown some reason to be excited for this team's going forward.
Yeah, for sure. And speaking of volleyball, by the way, we found out Indiana is not just a football school; they're a volleyball school as well.
Yeah, right. Not a basketball school anymore, apparently. But
Right. Yeah, I say that because you grew up in Indiana. I know you never would have thought of Indiana as a football school.
Nah, it's pretty amazing what they've done down there. I have a lot of friends who went there and so forth. They're just fans
Yeah,
in general, and it's been pretty amazing to watch that program turn around. They were always just awful growing up, but it's pretty crazy to see where they're at right now. And I'll be rooting for them in the playoff. That's for sure.
yeah. Well, you kind of have to being from Indiana, I think, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. But with the Buffs, I think the biggest thing the last few weeks has been the hiring of a new offensive coordinator coming into Boulder with Brennan Marion out of Sacramento State. And Brian, I'll put you on the spot on this one. I kind of wrote about this a little bit earlier in the week. Everything kind of profile wise with Brendan Marion sounds a lot like Sean Lewis. How is this going to be different?
Yeah, I think his offense is different. We'll see. I mean, I think you made some good points the other day in your column that, in a lot of ways it does profile like Sean Lewis. And, Sean Lewis was kind of the hot candidate, right? And in fact, when Carl Duro was fired that year, there were a lot of people that had Sean Lewis on the list for potential head coach that year. And so to get him as the OC was a big deal. And as you pointed out, and it's been pointed out many times, he lasted 8 games. I think what's different is that I think that was a situation where Sean Lewis and Shador didn't mesh that well. And so I think it's going to be a different situation here. I mean, Shador obviously, was a very experienced, mature quarterback that kind of knew how he wanted to operate. And he, as we saw it with Pat Shermer, Shador ran a lot of that stuff, right? And so he had a very big say in it. I think with a young quarterback like Juju Lewis, I think there's going to be maybe a little bit more listening and not that Shador wasn't coachable, but I think that Juju might be more coachable in that regard. And so I think it'll be different in that regard. And so we'll see.
By that logic, and you touched on it a little bit, doesn't Brendan Marion have to mesh with Julian Lewis? Don't they have to connect, or it's going to be a repeat of what we see almost every year with changing play callers?
Yeah, and that's always the case, right? I mean, the OC and the quarterback have to be on the same page, and it wasn't in the announcement that Brennan's going to be coaching quarterbacks, but on his Twitter page, he does have OC and quarterbacks coach at Colorado, so that confirms he's the quarterback coach, I guess. So, yeah, we'll see how he meshes there. It's obviously a different offense. I was telling you, I chatted with Darren Shiverini, the former Buffs receiver and offensive coordinator this week. He knows Brendan pretty well. And I said, how do you think Juju is going to, fit with this offense? He goes, I think he's going to love it. He's going to be a really good fit for it as long as he's got playmakers around him, or else he's going to get beat up. You gotta have offensive line protect him. You got to have that deep threat. And you got to have running backs. I mean, this offense is predicated on the run. I think that's the one thing that when you think of the Deion Sanders offenses, and then you bring in a coordinator that it relies on a power run game, you're like, huh, all right, well, you go from the worst rushing attack in the country. Even this year, while they were much better, they were like 113th in the country in rushing. Brennan Marion, his team at Sac State averaged 262 yards per game on the ground, and so all of a sudden, you're going to be a better running game, you would think, but you got to get some players in there to actually get that done.
We also had recently National Signing Day last week. Obviously, you wrote a nice feature just the other day on Bengula, the offensive line prospect coming in. What was your kind of reaction to the prep recruiting class? I know that has not been as big a priority under Coach Sanders as it has been in the past. I think that's okay, but you have to hit in the transfer portal. They didn't really do that, very well this past year. They did it maybe a little bit better with the first kind of wave of talent that Deion Sanders brought into Boulder. But doesn't that put a lot of pressure on making sure you do find the right fits in the transfer portal to find those immediate fixes?
Yeah, for sure. And you kind of, that's kind of where you're at now, because you haven't built much through the high school ranks, and so there's not that big foundation. So uh, unless you change your philosophy and plan to be here another 6 7 years and say, all right, from here on out we're going to go high school, you're going to have to rely on that portal a lot. And I thought the high school class was solid. They got some good players in there. It's not going to rank well because there's not a lot of players in it, but they're going to they've already added some to it, because they had a 4-star receiver that was committed to Sacramento State, and Brennan Marion, that has already flipped and come to Colorado. The transfer portal, we'll see. They've obviously got a lot of work to do there. There's been several Sac State guys that have jumped in the portal already, some of their top players, and so obviously the natural thing there is to think, is Brennan Marion going to bring those guys in there? But I don't think you want a team loaded up with Sacramento State players. I think get a couple of the best guys, but let's not load up with Sac State guys. Let's the Buffs need to load up with some guys that have got some bigger experience, I think, than Sacramento State. No offense to Sac State, it's just you want some Power Four experience.
Yeah, absolutely. Otherwise, you might as well try to go the prep route, right, and try to build a foundation. So,
Right. Mm-hmm.
But so far, there hasn't really been that max exodus to the transfer portal.
Yeah, not yet. And the portal does not open till
Doesn't
January.
technically
But
open yet, but a lot of times you hear the news
yeah,
coming out. But we would probably expect that to heat up within a few weeks here, right?
I would think so. We've seen Mantrez Walker announce he's going to the portal, the linebacker that I was actually excited about. I thought he was one of the top freshmen in this last year's class. He didn't play, but I think his future was really high or really good. Yeah, there hasn't been that mass exodus. I expect there to be quite a few players who are going to go in the portal at some point. I don't know when they're going to announce. I mean, there's no rush to announce. Like you said, I think the portal opens January 2nd, and so it's going to be fast and furious then. But there have been a lot of announcements around the country that these players from certain schools have already announced their intentions to go to the portal. We just haven't seen it yet at Colorado.
Something to keep an eye on, obviously, over the next month, and maybe shift into some basketball here. The men's team, obviously, coming off their first loss of the season. Great game up in Fort Collins. That's 2 times in a row. The game up there has been fantastic. Also, 2 times in a row, the Buffs have come out on the wrong end of it. As we know, the men's, they start off 8-0, had to set back at Fort Collins. It's crazy. Last week I was doing my research on it, and about the last time they started 8-0, and I'm going through the seasons, and I got all the way back to 1949-50, right? So I do it again. I'm like, that can't possibly be right. So I go through it all again. And then I text the sports information director with the men's basketball. And I'm like, is this right? Does it really go back to 1945-50? He's like, yeah, that was the last time they went 8-0. Now they've had more, maybe better starts under Boyle. Like, they've gone 11-1 and maybe had the loss earlier, or started 12-1 and had the loss earlier. But I was floored. They had to go all the way back to 49-50 to find the last 8-0 start. And obviously that came to an end at Colorado State. But me personally, they weren't going to go 31-0. And I think, getting on the road was our first true road game, getting in a rivalry match like that. They came all the way back. I still came out of that feeling like this team's going to be okay to be able to compete in the Big 12.
Yeah, they just got to play better defense. Their offense is pretty darn good, but that defense, as you've written about a lot, is pretty shaky so far this season. And what was it, 18 3-pointers that CSU hit?
Yeah.
If you you cut five of those out, three of those out, you win the game. And so, yeah, that defense has got to be better for sure. But I think this team, and you've written about it, but this team is more exciting than last year's team. And the Big 12 is going to be way different. We know that. I mean, the Big 12 is arguably the best conference in the country, and so. Um, uh, are they going to win? Half their games in the Big 12? I don't know, but I think they're going to be more exciting at least.
Absolutely. And this team, offensively, they're going to be fine. They're going to be able to score against anyone. Now, they're not going to go on the road and score 86 points at Iowa State
Yeah.
or at Houston the way they did at Colorado State. So they better get that defense up to par a little bit here. And I think they will. If you look at the season as a whole, Colorado State was absolutely a step backwards. But after kind of an early slate of games where they're giving up a high field goal percentage, they got better for a spell. They were better in those two wins in Palm Desert at the MTE, at the Acrisure Holiday Classic there in California. They played better defense. They played better defense in the second half against Cal Baptist last week against a pretty good mid-major team. So I think in the grand picture, they still are better than they were at the beginning of the year. Now, like I said, definite step back in Colorado State. I think some of it's still learning to play together. At the beginning of the year, Tad Boyle was talking about how it's a little bit of a selfish defense in that guys were staying on their guys. Like, this is my assignment, instead of providing the help defense when appropriate and when needed. But I think in that Colorado State, the pendulum swung a little bit too far the other way. I think at times they might have helped too much on drivers. If you let guys sometimes get, especially when the scouting report, Colorado State's one of the top 3-point shooting teams in the nation. They were, they cemented that, hitting the 18 against the Buffs, but they were already one of the best 3-point shooting teams in the nation going into that game. You have to take away the 3-pointers against them. That's what they do best. So if you maybe sag off of some of those drives, let them get the 2 points, stay on the 3-point shooters, you give up 10 3-pointers, that's still too many. But to your point, that's 8 less. You win the game pretty solidly if you're able to do that. So, but I think some of that will come a little more, it's still only the 9th game together for the most part for this group. I think that kind of nuance and learning the when to help, when not to help, dialing in a little bit better, more consistently to the scouting reports, I think is something that can improve going forward. Tad Boyle's teams more often than not get better as the season goes on. Even last year's team did. As poor as the season was, They were much better at the end than they were in November and December. And I think this team is even more coachable and more qualified to do that as the season goes on. So I think Colorado State has a chance to be a big learning lesson, but I think they'll shake that off and get back on track here.
Yeah, well, obviously they got a couple more games. How many more games in non-conference?
4. They got 2.
Okay.
They get into Saturday. Texas San Antonio, UTSA comes in here. They have Wednesday night against Portland State. Saturday night, a neutral floor game against Stanford in Phoenix. That'd be next Saturday. And then after the holidays, one last non-conference date against Northern Colorado at the Event Center before we get going in Big 12 play.
Yeah, awesome. So there's going to be some good opportunities. Is that 3 home games, you said?
3 home games.
Yeah, so 3 home games. I mean, we don't work for the university. I know you're going to write about this, but this is a great opportunity to go watch that team, this young team, at the Event Center. They are an exciting team, and I think there's going to be some good basketball, in these next 4 games in the non-conference, and get pumped up and ready for the Big 12. But that's a good team. They're fun to watch.
They're absolutely fun to watch. And it's been fun to watch. It's one of the things I enjoy about covering this program is, and you covered it for a spell, seeing guys come in and, Tad Boyle talks about retaining and developing over the course of the year. Well, I've been lucky enough to see that happen with a lot of guys, seeing where KJ Simpson was at the beginning of his career to where he was at the end of his career. Tristan DeSilva the same way. McKinley Wright. George King is another one I always think about, coming out of that redshirt season during his second year and the way he took off. So it's kind of fun to watch these guys grow. I think we're seeing it really with Bangot Dak the most right now, seeing where he was as a freshman and the way he's playing right now. Sebastian Ronchik is coming along in those lines as well. So, yeah, absolutely a fun team to watch. and a few home games. If the kids are out of school over the holidays, for a chance to maybe get to Boulder and check out a game.
Yeah, and a couple weekend games coming up.
A
So
couple weekends
yeah,
too.
so there'll be some good ones. And the women, they're kind of the opposite of the men. Is that they play pretty solid defense, but their offense is
Yeah,
not great. And you look in the Big 12, and I think they're in the 16 team Big 12. I think they're 15th in shooting percentage and 15th in 3-point percentage, and they've gone through a lot of scoring lulls, and but their defense is usually pretty solid. And at 7-3, probably less than what I thought they'd be at this point. I mean, they had a bad loss against Texas A&M out in Hawaii. That's an A&M team that was picked to be 14th in the SEC, and then they followed that up with a loss at home against Montana State. That's not a bad loss, Pat. I mean, Montana State won 30 games last year as projected to win the Big Sky, but when you put them back to back, that's a tough stretch. And the fact that
yeah,
they were up by 12 in the fourth quarter against Montana State and lose on a buzzer beater layup. So that's disappointing, but this is still a pretty good team. They're just more defensive oriented than the men are.
yeah. Like you said, kind of a reversal of the trends with that team, and another group that's still, I feel like, putting the pieces together. Right, it doesn't happen overnight, and it's not going to, college basketball. That's kind of the way it is right now. It's not something that's unique to Colorado by any means, or these two teams. And it's going to take a little bit of time. That's another team I would expect to be better in January and February. But there's games where they have too many turnovers. There's games where they just are out of sync offensively. The defense can, and Ted Boyle would be the first to say this as well. Defense can keep you in games on a nightly basis. When that offense is struggling, but for the women's team, that offense has kind of struggled the whole season so far. They haven't
Yeah.
really. The other thing that they haven't really found kind of a go-to person, a go-to set, something they can hang their hat on. Last year's men's team was kind of like that offensively. What does this team do well? Even at the end of the year, you couldn't really pinpoint it. So far this season, that's kind of how I feel offensively about the women. They don't really have anything they can hang their hat on or a go-to player they can go to maybe get a bucket when they need it.
Yeah, and part of it is one of their top players. I mean, Jade Masagayo was first team all conference last year and has really battled some knee sorenesses and has not played well so far this year because of that. And sat out the last game. But her knee's been bothering her, and so part of it is that, and also J.R. Payne's like, look, we're still trying to find out who plays well with each other. So you got all these parts that are solid, but if I'm playing Ziana Walker at the one, who does she play well with? It can be at the 2 or the 3. And so they're still trying to figure all that stuff out. They've only got a couple non-conference games left before they start conference play. So, it's gonna hit fast and furious for them, or the conference play here in a couple weeks.
And that's another thing that you just alluded to, that, and you've written about this a couple times, that has, maybe hampered that gelling process for the women's team, is some of these nagging injuries. Not just now, but I remember going back even to Big 12 Media Day in October in Kansas City. J.R. Payne was talking about how they haven't had a chance to have everyone at practice at the same time. One day this person's out, the next day that person's out, and to your point, when you're trying to figure out who plays well together with each other, what works best, that's hard when you don't have that kind of consistency of practice. The men's team has at least had that. Everyone's, Bang back was coming out of the summer injured, and Sebi Ranchik had a bit of an ankle for a spell there in the preseason. But injuries have not really been an issue so far for the men. But that gelling process for the women has really been hampered by a lot of those nagging injuries so far.
Yeah, and even I was over there on Wednesday, and Claire O'Connor, one of their transfers from Gonzaga, they thought would be a nice 3-point threat. She's missed a couple games with a foot injury. She didn't practice, and Desiree Wooten, who's been one of their go-to players, was feeling. I think she had food poisoning, so she wasn't practicing yesterday. And so just little things like that keep happening to this team, where it's like you can't have everybody there on a given day, and that's frustrating. And so we'll see if they can get it together. But there's a lot of talent and a lot of fun players on both these teams, and I think it's going to be overall kind of a fun basketball season. It may not. I don't think it's going to be two of the best teams in the Big 12, men and women, but I think they're going to be competitive and some pretty good teams in the Big 12.
Yeah, you have to feel like the men's team would probably surprise someone at home at some point. You know, that kind of classic upset at home. This team seems built for that. And if they get the defense, you know, they've, like I said, I've said it earlier, step backwards for sure at Colorado State, but they've been kind of better overall in the last few weeks. We'll see how they respond to that Colorado State loss here on Saturday against UTSA. But I expect them to respond well. And, you know, if they can play even average defense, they're going to be able to hang with some teams in the Big 12.
Yeah, well, it'll be a lot of fun, and we're obviously going to keep up with it, throughout the season. And there's going to be more football news with, some coaching staff things, and transfer portal, all that stuff. So we're gonna get more into it next week, and then we'll have a holiday break, Pat.
Time flies, man. I can't believe it's holidays already. I feel like we were just saying Happy Halloween on here, right?
I know. Well, hey, enjoy the rest of this week, and we'll see you again next week.
You too, my friend. And as always, folks, thanks for listening.